Good evening. I'm Stewart Brand from the Long Now Foundation. I'm curious, how many members of the Long Now Foundation are here? Raise your hands. Okay, after the show, you are supposed to mob the stage, and we'll come up here for the group photograph, of which you saw one of just recently. Thank you, Long Now members, for helping keep Long Now Foundation in operation from year to year. If by any chance you want to help keep it going from century to century, you may notice on the back of your introduction card some words about the fund of the Long Now, an endowment that we aim to set in motion once there's $500,000 there. Then we start going thousands of years like universities do, if you're so inclined. I mean, somebody's got to tend the clock. So for tonight, whenever San Francisco has a gold rush, it gets interested in discontinuity, and we are now. But that's exactly the time you want to be most interested in continuity. Because one of the things we keep learning at Long Now is as the future keeps unfolding, century after century, millennium after millennium, the past keeps unfolding and showing us new things. And nobody's better at that than Rick Prelinger.
Thank you, Stewart. Okay, so many friends and acquaintances. You know, I was going to ask how many of you have been to all 10 shows, but I can hardly see you. Are there a few of you? A few been to all 10 shows. How many of you are here for your first time? Oh, excellent. Welcome. So, look, this probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. This is quite unbelievably the 10th year after making this film. I realized it might be a little gloomier than last year's, but it's been a gloomy-ish year in San Francisco. I hasten to say don't worry, because it's also filled with life-affirming pictures. But now more than ever, this event is about the city that we would like to live in, that we want to live in, as much as about the city that was. Please try to keep that in your mind. A few special thanks. First and foremost, the community of San Francisco historians who makes this possible, who are the kind of growth medium, who put me in touch with folks that have material, who turn out in great numbers, etc. A special mention to Western Neighborhoods Project and to their new, and a shout out to their new amazing still historical image site, opensfhistory.org. If you haven't visited, do. Look, I'd like to also give special thanks to my partner and soulmate, Megan Prelinger. I don't want to embarrass her, but from the very start, she's been an unwavering supporter of my work, even as she's pursued a complex research and writing career of her own. So she's really made it all possible. Thank you. And my admonishment to all of you, you are the soundtrack. This year, the program is completely and utterly silent. So it's up to you to ask questions, to identify places, people, and events, to dispute the identifications of your neighbor, to engage in spirited and civil discussion. Tweeting is encouraged. Selfies are encouraged. Just don't blind your neighbor. Have fun. See you in 73 minutes. Thank you. This is about 1947, before our bridges, and even afterwards. And now again, we have our ferries. Matson Line. This is a feature film outtake. No idea. Slow boat to Frisco. I don't know. So you've seen this before, but never like this. This is a new 4K scan from Library of Congress. Yeah, this is, I think, the Western edition. We're going to come up, you'll see either Van Ness or Franklin, I believe. Horses and bicycles. You could try to keep at least one of each. This was a hand-cranked 35 millimeter film camera doing a very slow pan. Central Freeway. This is the New Bay Bridge. It's about, well, 10 years old. This is the 60s. I think some of you may recognize the new buildings that are going up. Very late 60s. Pacific Telephone. The old gas station on 3rd Street. Transbay Terminal. Sorely missed by some of us. Look at the clock on the bookstore. It's not really a clock, it's a triskelion, I think. The Muni and the Market Street Railway cars. From the mid-30s. From Tourist Home Movies, 1944. a montage of ordinary people, 50s, 60s, and 70s. These are outtakes from the official San Francisco Convention and Visitors Bureau film. Sometimes they're outtakes for a reason. This guy bought a Berkeley Barb, and probably not for the activism stories. This is wartime, about 44. Settling down for a wild night. So this is inside a bar, I believe, at Kearney and Market in the 30s, about 1936, 37. Riley's Cafe. And we're going to come back to the more these are outtakes from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And this is a background or for plate for rear projection. And you can see that it's ruined when people look at the camera. This is material shot by one of our local TV stations, presented for the first time in HD for a film about the Salvation Army. But this is what we now call Soma, the 3rd and Howard, 4th and Howard area looked like in somewhere around 1953-54. And it shows some desperation, but it also shows a community that in its own way was thriving. As many of you know, this neighborhood was leveled and stayed leveled for quite a number of years until they finally got it together to build Yerba Buena, later Moscone Center, and now there's hardly an inch of breathing room except that little park. One of the things I learned looking at this material was that it was many Greek-owned businesses. I'm not sure what street that is. But is that 4th and Howard? I can't quite see from here. So they're listening to a preacher in the Salvation Army band. One of the things that's interesting about that film is that the camera person didn't dwell on people's faces. So there was a sense of dignity to a lot of those shots. Sometime in the mid to late 40s, working waterfront. Freight traffic on the streets of South of Market. I believe it is. So this was a film probably made either by Hearst or Pathé around a time in San Francisco in 1916, a year before we entered World War I, when there was a lot of resistance to to militarism, and much of it was led by anarchists. And this is an anti-anarchist film. A bit of a content advisory coming up. This is newly preserved at. These are wobblies. So this was a militaristic parade. There were a lot of objections to it. There was a bomb, and 2 people associated with the labor movement were arrested, Tom Muni and Warren Billings. Later on, their cases were vacated, but not until after most of them, I think both of them had spent over 20 years in prison. This was a big cause of the American left. And nobody knows who did this exactly. Yeah, that's Mayor Sonny Jim Rolfe. This is April 1916, and it's a pro-war parade, Preparedness Day. This has been newly preserved by Library of Congress. We've moved to the early 30s, and you will fondly remember these moving shots of Chinatown. Time to change film. Every year he keeps running. From what? We don't know. The lineup, outtake. Hang on. Now, this was discovered in the National Archives by Gray Brecken, historian of the New Deal and many other things. And this is a film about the Federal Theater Project, and this is the Hippodrome in 35 or 36, I believe, half abandoned. This is in Barbary Coast, Jackson Street. The man on the left is Mr. Yessen. He ran a advertising art and sign painting company, and it was a union shop. And his granddaughter has given us some wonderful films. Since it was a union shop, he did work for a lot of the unions, and a jolly fellow. There's his truck. He was on Stevenson Street. Here's some of his work. This is for all you, I expect to see these motifs in next year's graphic design. They specialized in these moving billboards. Some of his crew. You'll recognize that building at Van Ness and Mission. If anybody recognizes any of these streets. This was the Labor candidate. And this is the San Francisco Muni Marching Band. Does this still exist? It should. This is Labor Day, and I believe it's a composite of Labor Day 1939 and 1940. But think of San Francisco as a union town. And there's these wonderful thematic floats, and this is, of course, a demonstration of the force and the power of labor. What's interesting isn't just the marchers, it's the spectators, because there's quite a lot of them. But the Yessen company made a lot of these floats. They're stopping for a drink. You'll see some people in their Labor Day marching costumes having a quick one. So the ILWU was the union that organized the Longshore workers and then moved inland to the warehouse workers. It was a union who had been built at the beginning by, many of them were Communist Party members, a strong progressive union. Take a look at this abundance yet scarcity. This is Harry Bridges. And help me with these other men if you know. Harry Bridges was an Australian man who he worked the docks in San Francisco and became very active in the early and illegal organizing phases of the first Longshore local. This was a local where the rank and file members voted on all major decisions. And around this time, the US government was trying to prove that he was a communist and deport him. This is 1940. I think you can tell from the Wilkie McNary campaign signs. Right, there was a newsreel theater. This, I think, is Stewart Street outside the Longshore Union hiring hall at 113 Stewart, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Yessen, shaking the hand that feeds him. One of the most successful union organizing situations in history, and corporations hated it. These are the white-collar unions, most of which were closed down after the World War II because they were close to the Communist Party. The Longshore Dog. This was after the Nazis and the Soviets had signed the Non-Aggression Pact and before Pearl Harbor. This is the rat who is informing on Harry Bridges. It's a Labor Day parade. This is the late 30s. And we're getting on the ferry to go to Treasure Island. And at Treasure Island is the World's Fair. There's some silent footage here if you want to sing over it. There's a train going by the way. Key system train. This is Kodachrome, which is very saturated, and so it has a particular color scheme. It's a little overexposed in the center and underexposed in the periphery. A smart-looking family. Mom is probably shooting, if I'm not mistaken. I have heard that the exposition was really the first time a lot of people actually took the bridge. All color-coded, concentric paths, concentric loops of color. Entertaining and authentic. The Gay Way. Variety of attractions on the Gay Way. We've made this sequences shot here kind of family friendly, so you won't see everything. I know. Beware of anything that's free on the midway. I couldn't resist the beautiful California pavilion. So Zoe Delantis is 100 years old today, or not today, this year. She was the theme girl of the fair. She became a pilot, and she was. She also ran a technology company, and was head of the. I think the first. I have some notes here. The first woman president of the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Big bands and first-class entertainment every day. I believe that's Benny Goodman. This was considered, a great threat to the social order in its time. Jitterbugging. They're jitterbugging sitting down. It's either on film or it isn't. Daydreams. Right, we've cut a little bit here. It'll cost you a dime to see what's really going on. We could replicate this anywhere. The television one is interesting to me. I have to look into that one. Age-old drunkard. Not uncensored in this show. This is August 1941. The fair is gone, but this is the terminal for the Pan Am Clippers across the Pacific. Building's still there, of course. Here's their offices. Beautiful control tower. And this is Clipper Cove. I don't remember the exact figures, but the crew on these flights came close in number to the number of passengers. And it was, I gather, quite luxurious. 3-day flight to Australia. This would be one answer to extending the runways in the bay, but I don't think it would pass the environmental test. Some tourists in 1944. Still a fair amount of cars out on the road. A little bit of working port here. The obligatory trip to the wharf. And of course, the Instagram food pictures of the day. What is that? She seems tentative. She This is the late 50s, family, poor quality unfortunately, but taking the red and white bay cruise. And traveling a little bit. And this is the Yessen family out by the yacht club. No wave organ, unfortunately, at that point. This is the late 30s. That's a slingshot. Lovely Palace of Fine Arts. Inside. This is just as they shot it, so if there's a story there. And this is from the Federal Theater film. They're playing tennis inside the Palace of Fine Arts. And here there's some other people are locked out of their car. I just had to leave this in. And from Twin Peaks, a somewhat less built out city. This is 1944 again. This is a film from roughly that same period. If you were to slow it down, you'd see some very, very old houses in place, like that one. This is David Gallagher has just researched this. David, where are we and when? Kezar Stadium, 1939. Our old DeYoung. Was rebuilt at least twice. So we've seen our neighbors, the G family from 15th Avenue before, but we haven't seen them in high def, and I found some new material of them as well. The second Chinese-American family to move onto the block, 15th Avenue in the Richmond district. Here he's delivering the call bulletin, and here we're at Stowe Lake eating those Betty Lou potato chips. Popcorn, excuse me, of course. Traffic accident at 15th and Balboa. Happens all the time. And he's in the safety patrol. Going off to Argonne Elementary School. He's got company. In the 60s. I'm thinking it's when the Saints go marching in, but I don't know. Yeah, outside land. Hardly strictly bluegrass. Kathy G. Prom. And this is the snowfall of, what was this, 62? This is the 60s. Later, this is up on, by the Tower Market. Oh, yeah. This is the old car barns. This is at Irving and Funston near Andronikos. Well, it's the site of Andronikos. The boneyard. But it's a kind of a bit of a place of wonder. When did we decide this was somewhere around, 1947-ish? Is that right? Right, the big Irving Theater sign in the rear. But we have fewer and fewer of these spaces where kind of, feral vegetation takes over. Woody LeBounty, the author of Carville by the Sea, is here to take questions. Right, this is what is the Lakeshore Park neighborhood, right? Inverness Avenue, right after the war. I think there's somebody in the audience who grew up near here. This is a streetcar rail fan trip. This is in sometime in the early 60s, probably, but I love that. And so the glider over the unbuilt sunset, about 1919, 1920. But these are the early avenues. One of these days, I promise a digital restoration. Late 50s, Sutra baths. Oh yeah, the White Tower gas station, is that what you said? Right near where, across from where Seal Rocks Inn is now? Hang on. So we've all seen footage of the Ohioan and the Frank T. Buck wrecked off of Land's End, but one of the things that only has become clear in this film from a private collector that we scanned a couple weeks ago is that there was also a whale that was washed up. And so here humans try to come to terms with this animal. These wrecks were a huge tourist attraction for a number of years. They're still visible pieces at low tide. February 1938. Making social trails. Brief view of the short-lived Sky Tram. And a wartime rainy day at the beach. these two fellas. Little bit of playland. Nobody's out. And then slipping away from us in the rain and fog, a little bit of playland. Yes, 8mm. And 8th and Harrison, right by the Prelinger Library. And here is where we take our leave of San Francisco. Thank you. Yeah.